Your mother signed this so I'd be taken care of. The house has already been listed on MLS. You've got 1 hour to pack your garbage and clear out before the locksmith gets here. Chelsea's moving into your old room tonight. That is the sentence my stepfather spoke to me in the study of our Rosedale home, 12 minutes after we lowered my mother into the frozen ground at Mount Pleasant Cemetery. He didn't even pretend to be grieving. He just slapped a document down on the walnut desk, like he was serving an eviction notice in small claims court. I looked down at it. A quitclaim deed, dated February 3rd, 11 days before my mother slipped into the coma she never woke up from. The signature sitting at the bottom was a trembling, uneven scrawl that looked nothing like the elegant cursive my mother had used to sign Christmas cards for 40 years. It was a forgery, a lazy, panicked one. Then I glanced through the bay window and noticed the black Escalade idling at the curb, two thick-necked men in wool overcoats, staring up at the front door. Everything clicked. My stepfather, the man my mother had insisted on calling Lawrence because he thought Larry sounded too working class, wasn't just being cruel. He was being hunted. The men he owed money to had come for their pound of flesh, and selling my dead mother's house was the only check he had left to write. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't even raise my voice. I simply zipped up my coat, picked up my purse, and looked my stepfather dead in the eye. "Enjoy the view while it lasts, Lawrence," I said. "I've seen a lot of people sell their own reflection for a quick loonie. None of them ever noticed the mirror was cracked until it was too late. If you've ever watched family turn into a stranger the second the will was read, tell me in the comments what was the exact moment you realized they never loved you, they just tolerated you for the inheritance." 2 hours later, I was sitting on a mattress on the hardwood floor of a basement apartment off Ossington, listening to the streetcar rattle past every 4 minutes. The ceiling was low enough that my tallest friend would have had to duck. The radiator knocked like someone was trapped inside it. It was a very long way down from the limestone facade and leaded glass windows of the Rosedale house, but at least the air down here didn't taste like a lie. For the last 7 months, my entire life had been the geography of Princess Margaret Hospital. The 9th floor, the oncology wing, the vending machine that always ate my toonies. I slept so many nights in that vinyl recliner beside her bed that my chiropractor told me my spine had started curving like a question mark. I was the one measuring out her hydromorphone. I was the one on the phone with the palliative nurse at 2 a.m. when her breathing went ragged. I was also the one logging into the joint accounts every Sunday evening, watching my mother's life savings bleed out in thin red lines, business development withdrawals, client dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of, cash advances against her line of credit. Every time I asked my stepfather about a $5,000 draw, he'd give me that slow, condescending smile and tell me I didn't understand how real money moved. Oh, I understood perfectly. I understood that while I was swabbing my mother's cracked lips with a wet sponge, he was feeding her retirement into the baccarat tables at Casino Woodbine. And then, in early December, he brought Chelsea home. He introduced her as a private care aide, contracted through some agency he couldn't quite remember the name of. She had a nursing scrub top she never seemed to actually work in, and a laugh that carried from the master bedroom down the back stairwell to the kitchen. She spent more time appraising the group of 7 prints in the hallway than she ever spent checking my mother's vitals. She wasn't there to provide palliative care. She was auditioning for a role that hadn't quite opened up yet. But the moment that broke something permanent inside me wasn't the eviction. It was the funeral. My stepfather stood at the graveside in a charcoal Harry Rosen suit, shoulders shaking, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. The cousins from Thunder Bay whispered about what a devoted husband he'd been, how destroyed he looked. It was Governor General's award-level acting. But the second the last mourner turned toward their car, the mask slid off. His hand clamped around my upper arm, hard enough to leave a bruise the color of overripe plum, and he hissed into my ear. "Fix your face. You're making me look bad in front of the investors from Calgary." He was networking for oil money at his own wife's burial. And then, as I glanced across the cemetery toward the row of black Lincolns, I saw Chelsea. She was standing under a small black umbrella, trying to arrange her features into something approximating grief. She was wearing a simple wool dress, and around her throat, resting exactly where I had kissed my mother goodbye 12 hours earlier, was the double strand of Mikimoto pearls with the sapphire clasp. My lungs stopped working. Those pearls were the ones my father had given my mother on their 10th anniversary, before the cancer took him too. The ones she had placed in my palm 3 weeks before she died, closing my fingers around them with what little strength she had left, whispering that she wanted me to wear them on my own wedding day. The ones I had locked in her bedroom, safe the morning she was admitted for the last time. Lawrence hadn't just stolen the house. He hadn't just drained the accounts. He had pried open the safe before her body was cold, and draped my mother's most sacred possession around his girlfriend's neck, like a clearance rack accessory. That was the moment I stopped thinking of this as grief. This was erasure. He wanted to wipe us both out, me and my mother, so he could rewrite his story with a new woman and 5 million untraceable dollars. He thought taking the house was the final move. He thought I'd curl up in a basement apartment and lose myself in cheap wine and regret. But as I sat there on that sagging mattress, watching the rain slide down the window well, I stopped crying. I pulled my laptop out of its bag, and I remembered something my stepfather had never bothered to learn. He thought he ran the Rosedale house because he held the front door key. He forgot that I was the one who had wired every smart device in it. The screen cast a pale blue glow across the bare walls. I didn't have a plan yet, not a real one, but I had a thread to pull. Lawrence was arrogant, but arrogance and sloppiness are twins. He'd changed the locks. He'd probably changed the Wi-Fi password. But there was something he didn't know existed. I navigated to the administrator portal of the house's main security system and typed in my credentials. Access denied. I tried again, slower. Denied. He'd rotated the password, or more likely, Chelsea had, because Lawrence couldn't program a microwave without calling his nephew. For one dizzy second, panic washed through me. If I couldn't get into the feed, I couldn't prove anything. Then I remembered the shadow network. Back in September, when I'd first started suspecting the so-called care aide was spending more time in my mother's jewelry box than at her bedside, I'd quietly installed a secondary ring of nanny cams. High definition, audio-enabled. One tucked inside the spine of a false book in the library. One hidden in the carving of the fireplace in the master bedroom. One in the smoke detector above the kitchen island. They ran on a completely separate server, backed up to a private cloud registered to a numbered corporation in Alberta. My stepfather had never even heard of it. I typed in the passcode. Margaret 1958. My mother's name. Her birth year. Access granted. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the edges of the laptop to steady them. I scrolled to the previous evening's archive. I clicked on the file time-stamped 10:47 p.m., the night before the funeral. The library came into focus in crisp 4K. There was Lawrence, pouring himself 2 generous fingers from the bottle of Macallan 25, my mother had been saving for my eventual wedding toast. Chelsea was slouched in my father's old leather chair, idly spinning in lazy half-circles, scrolling through something on her phone. I slipped on my headphones. Lawrence, babe, are you sure this is going to fly? Chelsea said, her voice bored. She was examining her gel manicure. The signature looks like she had a stroke mid-sentence. Lawrence drained the glass in one long swallow. Doesn't have to be perfect, sweetheart. Just has to hold up for 48 hours. By Monday morning, we're in Punta Cana, and the check has cleared. He poured a second glass, steadier this time, and leaned both palms against the desk. His face in the light of the banker's lamp was gray and shiny with sweat. The Hamilton boys phoned again this afternoon. I've got until Friday noon. If the wire hasn't hit by then, they aren't talking anymore. They're finishing the conversation. Do you understand what that means? Chelsea made a small, disinterested noise. So we sell it, Lawrence continued, his voice dropping into that whispery register men use when they're trying to make crime sound like strategy. We find a cash buyer. Someone who doesn't want the inspection, doesn't want the appraisal, doesn't want to meet the neighbors. We dump the place for whatever we can get, I clear the marker, and we're on a plane before Audrey or her mother's lawyer even knows the title moved. I hit the pause button so hard the laptop skidded on my knees. There it was. Not a suspicion, not a hunch. A confession, uttered on camera, in 4K, with crystal audio, time-stamped, and backed up to a server he didn't know existed. He wasn't just a grieving husband making a grief-stricken mistake. He was a terrified gambler confessing to forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and plotting to flee the country with the proceeds of a stolen estate. I leaned my forehead against the cool plaster of the basement wall. I could take this footage to 51 Division in the morning. I could file an emergency injunction through my mother's lawyer and have him escorted out by Toronto Police Services before the stockings even came off Chelsea's feet. But I thought about how Lawrence sounded in a courtroom. I thought about how easy it would be for his lawyer to argue that a dying 74-year-old woman's signature was supposed to look shaky. I thought about the 2, 3, 4 years of civil probate fights ahead, during which he would keep living rent-free in my mother's house, drinking her scotch, grinding down her estate in billable hours. Stopping him wasn't enough. I didn't want a restraining order. I wanted a conviction. And for that, he couldn't just talk about a crime. He had to finish one. A big one. The kind the RCMP and the Mounties Integrated Market Enforcement Team didn't let slide. Something federal. He wanted a cash buyer who wouldn't ask questions? Fine. I was going to give him one. The next morning, I walked into the law offices of McAllister, Green, and Whitfield on Bay Street with a USB stick in my coat pocket and a plan half-formed in my head. Jonathan McAllister had been my mother's solicitor for nearly 30 years. He was old Toronto, the kind of lawyer who still wore a pocket square, still took his coffee with a single cube of sugar, and still believed that a signature was a sacred thing. I closed his office door behind me, sat down across from his enormous desk, and played him the footage. By the time Lawrence got to the word Punta Cana, Jonathan had turned a shade of purple I hadn't known a human face could achieve. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses, set them carefully on the leather blotter, and pressed his thumbs into his eye sockets. "Audrey," he said, "this is not a probate matter anymore. This is a criminal file. We can have the RCMP at that house before the banks open tomorrow." "No." He looked up. "An injunction stops him, Jonathan. It doesn't end him. He'll claim duress. He'll claim he was in shock from losing his wife. He'll find some boutique defense firm willing to turn the shaky signature into a sympathetic shaky signature, and I will spend the next 5 years fighting him from a basement apartment while he sleeps in my childhood bed. I don't want to stop the sale." Jonathan's eyebrows moved a full centimeter upward. "I'm sorry?" "I want him to go through with it, all the way through." For a long second, he was perfectly still. Then the corners of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly, into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was sharper than a smile. He reached into his bottom drawer and pulled out a cream-colored folder tied with a red ribbon, the kind of file jacket lawyers haven't used in Toronto since the 80s. "You know," he said, untying the ribbon with delicate fingers, "the truly tragic thing is that he never needed to do any of this. Your mother knew exactly who she married the second time. She didn't love him less for it, but she did plan for it." He slid a document across the desk. I turned it toward me. It was her real last will and testament, not the one Lawrence had waved around at the reception. The genuine, witnessed, notarized document, executed in this very office 18 months earlier when, I now realized, my mother had already known she was dying but hadn't yet told me. Jonathan tapped a paragraph halfway down page 4. "A life estate," he said quietly. She granted him a life estate in the Rosedale property. He had the legal right to live in that house, rent-free, utilities paid from the residuary trust, until the day he died. Afterward, it reverted to you. She wanted to make sure he never ended up homeless. But, and here his finger slid down to a bolded clause in paragraph 19, she included a defeasance condition. Read it. I read it twice. Any attempt by the life tenant to sell, mortgage, encumber, or transfer legal or beneficial title of the property, or to represent himself as the holder of fee simple, shall constitute a repudiation of the gift, and shall immediately and automatically void the life estate, with full legal and beneficial ownership reverting to the remainderman, Audrey Margaret Whitfield. I looked up. "If he had just sat still," Jonathan said, his voice almost gentle, "he would have had a roof over his head until his last breath. But by listing that property, by forging her name on a quitclaim deed, by signing a purchase agreement with a buyer, he isn't merely committing fraud, he is legally evicting himself." I felt something I hadn't felt in 7 months. Not joy. Something colder, steadier. Something like gravity coming back. "Then, let's help him pack," I said. We spent the next 90 minutes architecting the trap. I wasn't going to let some real family, some trusting young couple from Mississauga with 2 kids, and a pre-approval letter walk into this mess. We needed a shell buyer. Jonathan had a corporate vehicle he used for numbered acquisitions on behalf of privacy-sensitive clients. A holding company registered in British Columbia, clean paper, no connection to either of us. Cascadia Holdings Incorporated. We drafted the offer carefully. Not 5 million, too round, too suspicious. We came in at $4,725,000, a number that felt specific enough to be real. All cash. No financing condition. No home inspection. A 10-day close, justified by a 1031-style cross-border tax structure for an American parent company. We sent the offer to the listing Lawrence had hastily thrown up on a for-sale-by-owner site that very morning. It took him 9 minutes to reply. From my basement, I watched the email chain land in Jonathan's inbox. Interesting offer. Owner will accept at $4,950,000 firm. Need closing in 7 days, not 10. Buyer must waive right of rescission. Jonathan looked at me over the top of his glasses. He's negotiating, Audrey. The man is committing 3 indictable offenses, and he is trying to squeeze us for an extra $200,000. Let him win, I said. Counter at $4,875,000 and waive rescission. Make him feel clever. 3 minutes later, the reply came back. Accepted. Send the agreement of purchase and sale. Closing Thursday. I looked at Jonathan. Book the boardroom for Thursday morning. I want to be there. Thursday arrived with a low Toronto sky, the color of wet newsprint. The closing was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the offices of Bellwether and Finch, a boutique real estate firm on the 42nd floor of First Canadian Place. The kind of building where the elevators smell faintly of cedar and the receptionist knows everyone's coffee order. I wasn't in the boardroom. Not yet. I was sitting in an unmarked black sedan in the P3 parking level, watching a live video feed piped in from a lapel pin camera worn by Jonathan's junior associate, a sharp young woman named Reese, who was going to be playing the part of Cascadia Holdings' closing representative. At 9:54, a taxi rolled up to the front entrance on King Street. Lawrence stepped out. He was wearing the navy Armani suit he had bought for my mother's 60th birthday party 4 years earlier. It strained across his middle now, his belly pushing against the buttons. But he held himself like a man walking into a boardroom to announce a merger. Chelsea trailed behind him in a cream coat and sunglasses the size of saucers, thumbing through Instagram, occasionally pausing to like a photograph of an overwater bungalow in Turks and Caicos. They rode the elevator to 42. They walked down the hushed hallway as if they'd bought the building. Reese stood to greet them. Thank you for accommodating our closing window, Mr. Whitfield. My client is keen to wrap the cross-border piece before quarter end. Always happy to help with efficient capital, Lawrence said, his voice too loud for the room. He dropped into a leather chair and began drumming his fingers on the glass table. His forehead was already shining. He looked at the bottle of Fiji water in front of him, but didn't pour any. His hands were too unsteady to risk it in public. I zoomed in on Reese's lapel feed. I could see every pore. We have the wire instruction queued with our bank, Reese said, sliding a thick-bound set of documents across the table. 4,875,000 Canadian, releasing upon registration of the transfer. May I see the deed? This was the moment. Lawrence opened his briefcase. His fingers fumbled at the clasp for a half-second before he mastered them. He withdrew the quitclaim deed, the one with my mother's shaky, forged signature, and placed it on the table with the theatrical flourish of a man laying down a royal flush. Then he began to talk. He told Reese that his late wife had transferred the property to him in her final weeks, out of love and prudence, to simplify the estate. He told Reese that there was a daughter me, but that she was a difficult young woman with a substance problem who had accepted a cash settlement years ago and waived her rights. He said this with a small, sorrowful shake of the head, as if my imaginary addiction were a burden he had carried with quiet dignity. I listened to him describe me, a woman who had spent 7 months sleeping in a vinyl hospital chair as an unstable addict who had sold her own mother's memory for drug money. And I felt the last thread of anything resembling mercy snap inside my chest. Reese slid the bill of sale across the table. Lawrence signed it. No hesitation. The pen made a confident, audible scratch across the dotted line. He initialed 3 pages. He signed the statutory declaration of no undisclosed interests. He signed the vendor's representation regarding title. He signed his own resignation from his own life. Reese picked up her phone and placed a short call. Release the wire. Lawrence's phone buzzed on the table in front of him. He looked down. His pupils dilated. I watched the corners of his mouth twitch upward in a kind of feral, disbelieving joy. He had just received an instant transfer notification for $4,875,000, Canadian dollars. He looked at Chelsea. Chelsea looked at him. She mouthed, silently, the words Turks and Caicos. That was when the boardroom door opened. Jonathan walked in first, 3-piece suit, pocket square, face perfectly composed. I walked in second. Behind us came Detective Inspector Harjit Brar of the Toronto Police Service Financial Crimes Unit and a special agent from the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team, along with 2 uniformed Toronto constables who stayed near the door. Lawrence shot to his feet so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the credenza. Audrey, what are you doing here? This is a closing, this is private, you can't. Sit down, Lawrence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Something in the room had shifted, and he could feel the floor moving under his Italian leather shoes. You can't be in this room, he said, louder now, looking at the officers. This is a confidential commercial transaction. My lawyer? Where's my lawyer? You didn't bring one, Jonathan said mildly. We offered, in writing, 3 times. It's in the file. Lawrence turned to me. He tried for the old sneer, the one he'd used on me since I was 15 years old. You little brat. You think you can come in here and ruin a legitimate business deal? I own that house. Your mother signed it over to... No, she didn't. I set a clean copy of my mother's real will down on the table. I set the life estate page on top of it, paragraph 19 highlighted in pale yellow. Jonathan pulled up the nanny cam footage on the boardroom's conference screen. Lawrence's voice filled the room at crystalline volume. We dumped the place for whatever we can get. I clear the marker. And we're on a plane before Audrey or her mother's lawyer even knows the title moved. The McAllen, the Sweat, the Hamilton boys. Chelsea laughing. Chelsea made a small, high noise, like air escaping a balloon, and half stood from her chair. Constable Desjardins at the door shook his head once, and she sat back down. Detective Brar stepped forward. Mr. Whitfield, my name is Detective Inspector Brar. I need you to keep your hands where I can see them. You are under arrest for uttering a forged document under Section 368 of the Criminal Code, for fraud over $5,000 under Section 380, and he glanced at the RCMP agent. We'll let our federal colleagues speak to the wire transfer. The RCMP agent stepped forward. Mr. Whitfield, the funds that just landed in your personal account traveled through a FinTrack reportable cross-border corridor. That makes your receipt of them, based on a document you have now signed under oath, was authentic, a matter of federal wire fraud. The transfer has been flagged and frozen. Lawrence's head snapped toward his phone on the table. I saw the notification on his screen go from green to gray as, somewhere in a tower in downtown Toronto, a compliance officer hit a button. You set me up. His voice cracked on the last word. This is entrapment. This is... No, Lawrence, Jonathan said, almost kindly. Entrapment requires inducement. You listed the property of your own volition. You forged the deed of your own volition. You lied to the purchaser of your own volition, on camera, after being given 3 separate opportunities to disclose the true state of title. What you did today, you did entirely on your own. Then I spoke. For the first time since the door opened, I looked him directly in the eye. 5 minutes ago, you had a home, Lawrence, for the rest of your natural life. My mother arranged that. Even knowing who you were, she didn't want you on the street. All you had to do was sit still. I gestured at the document on the table, the signed bill of sale, the one where he had sworn, under penalty of perjury, that he held fee simple title to the Rosedale house. The second your pen hit that line, the life estate defaulted, the property reverted. You just evicted yourself from the only roof you had left, and you did it in front of 3 witnesses, a notary, a crown officer, and a federal agent. I turned to Chelsea. She was staring at the pearls in her lap. She had taken them off at some point, and she was holding them like they had started to burn. Chelsea, those are my mother's. I'd like them back, please. She handed them across the table with both hands, without looking up. And the Lalique ring on your right hand. And the Cartier tank watch on your left wrist. Those also came out of her safe. She removed them, each one, and placed them in a small pile on the polished glass. The RCMP agent leaned toward her. Miss Pomeroy, audio recordings captured in the Rosedale residence indicate prior knowledge of the forgery and active participation in planning the fraudulent sale. You're also going to want to come with us. Chelsea started to cry, quietly, the way people cry when they finally understood the price of a decision they made 6 months ago. They put the cuffs on Lawrence first. As Constable Desjardins walked him past my chair, he twisted his head back. Audrey, I raised you. After your father, I raised you, please. I let him get all the way to the door before I answered, because I wanted him to hear it clearly, with nothing else in his ears. You didn't raise me, Lawrence. You tolerated me. And for the record, since you're still legally occupying the Rosedale property as of this morning, I'll be having the locks changed this afternoon. Your personal effects will be boxed and available for pickup at the curb on Tuesday, between 8 and 10 a.m. That's how eviction notices work in Ontario. I'd know. You taught me. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. They walked him down the hallway. Chelsea went after him a minute later, escorted by the other constable. The boardroom door sighed shut behind them. Jonathan exhaled long and slow and poured himself a glass of water with hands that were only slightly less steady than mine. That, he said, was the single most disciplined piece of personal vengeance I have witnessed in 41 years of practice. It wasn't vengeance, I said. He looked at me. My mother left him a home. He turned it into a crime scene. I just made sure the paper trail caught up to the truth. 3 weeks later, I stood in the front hall of the Rosedale house for the first time since the morning of the funeral. The locksmith had just left. The new keys were warm in my palm. The air inside smelled like dust and old perfume and, very faintly, McAllen. I walked through every room slowly. I opened the safe in the master closet. My mother's pearls were back inside. I ran my thumb along the double strand once, just once, and closed the door. In the library, I poured myself a very small measure of the McAllen 25 into one of my mother's crystal tumblers. I sat down in my father's old leather chair. I looked out the bay window at the bare maples on the front lawn, their branches silvery with the first real snow of the year. Lawrence is currently on remand at Toronto South Detention Center, awaiting a joint Crown prosecution on forgery, fraud over, and federal wire fraud charges. Chelsea accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. The Hamilton boys, as it turned out, were already on a police watch list of their own, and a proceeds of crime file opened up against them within a week. None of this brought my mother back. None of it made the 7 months of hospital chairs any shorter in memory. But as I sat there in the quiet, with the snow starting to fall heavier now, I realized something my mother had tried to teach me for years, and I had never quite understood until that afternoon in the boardroom. Real revenge isn't loud. It isn't a scream, it isn't a slammed door or a shattered glass or a scene at a funeral. Real revenge is staying calm while someone signs their own name, again and again, on every single line of their own undoing and handing them the pen each time they reach for it. I took one sip of the scotch. I set the glass down. And for the first time in 7 months, in the house where I had grown up, I closed my eyes and simply breathed.